My name is Renata Cole. I'm 34, and 3 weeks ago, I sat in my father's office and watched him hand my younger brother a check for $91,000 with my name nowhere on it. He called it Derek's bonus. He called it an investment in the future of the company. He didn't know I'd read the operating agreement he signed 11 years ago, the one that made me a 51% owner the day I turned 30. He was about to find out. But first, let me take you back to the year I turned 22, the year I learned exactly how much I was worth to this family, and exactly how little. Welcome back to Quiet Reckonings, where we tell true, dignified stories about people who stopped shrinking and started standing up straight. If this story sounds like yours, drop a comment with your city and the time where you're watching, and hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. I grew up in Modesto, California, the older of two kids in a family that ran a mid-sized commercial refrigeration business called Cole Cold Storage. My father, Walter Cole, started it in a rented warehouse with 2 used trucks and a business loan he almost didn't get approved for. My mother, Denise, kept the books by hand until I was in middle school. My brother Derek is 3 years younger than me, and from the time he could talk, he was the one Dad pointed to and said, "That's my successor." I was the one who actually worked the business. At 16, I was answering phones after school. At 19, while Derek was failing out of his second semester of community college, I was doing dispatch logistics for 6 drivers and learning the compressor maintenance schedule better than the technicians we hired. At 22, I had an accounting degree from Fresno State, a 3.9 GPA, and a standing offer from a regional logistics firm in Sacramento, paying $58,000 a year. I turned it down. My father asked me to stay and run operations. He said the same 4 words he always used when he needed something from me and didn't want to pay full price for it. "We're all family here." Derek got a truck for his 18th birthday, brand new, financed through the company. I was still driving the Corolla I bought myself at 17 with server tip money from the diner on McHenry Avenue. When I asked about it once, at dinner, my mother said, "Derek needs it for his image. You don't need that kind of thing, Ren. You're sensible." I have never forgotten the word sensible. It followed me for the next 12 years like a leash with just enough slack to keep working and just enough tension to keep me from asking for more. That's the piece you need to understand before anything else. In my family, sensible meant the one who won't complain. Derek was the dream. I was the infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't get a bonus. It gets a paycheck and a thank you, if you're lucky. By 26, I was company controller in everything but title, running payroll, vendor contracts, and the books my mother could no longer keep up with. My father was 61 by then, tired in the way men get tired when a business has been chewing at their spine for 3 decades, and he started talking about succession. Not with me, with his accountant, his lawyer, and eventually with me, but only because his lawyer told him he had to. Here's the detail that matters. In 2015, my father restructured Cole Cold Storage into an LLC for tax and liability reasons. His attorney, a careful man named Arthur Bellingham, who'd handled the company's legal work since 1998, drew up an operating agreement. I sat in on that meeting because I was the one who understood the finances well enough to catch mistakes. Buried in Section 4, subsection C, was a clause my father barely glanced at. Upon my 30th birthday, 51% of membership interest would transfer to me, structured as deferred compensation for 11 years of under-market salary. Arthur had pushed for it. He told me privately, years later, over coffee, that he'd seen too many family businesses gut the child who actually did the work, while the favored child got the name on the door. He built in a mechanism to protect me before my father could think twice about it. My father signed it without reading the fine print carefully, because in 2015, I was 23, and it felt like a hypothetical 7 years away. He wasn't planning for the day I'd actually hold the majority. He was planning around Derek, always Derek, the way you plan a party around the guest of honor and forget to check if there's a chair for everyone else. I turned 34 years ago. The transfer happened exactly as written. I told no one at the office. I told no one at Thanksgiving. I kept my badge, my modest salary, my same desk by the loading dock windows, and I said nothing. Because saying something would have meant a conversation I wasn't ready to have with a father who still called me sensible and still meant it as a compliment for staying small. Derek, meanwhile, drifted through 3 separate roles at the company, with 3 separate job titles and no real portfolio of results. Sales lead, regional accounts, VP of growth strategy, a title my father invented for him after a consultant suggested Derek needed more ownership over outcomes. Derek's biggest closed deal in 4 years was a contract with a Turlock grocery chain that I structured the pricing model for, on a Sunday, from my kitchen table, uncredited, because Derek asked me to just double-check his numbers the night before the pitch. That was always the arrangement. Derek got the stage, I got the script he read from. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning at 8:40, I walked into my father's office to review Q3 numbers, the way I do every quarter. My father was standing behind his desk with a check already printed, my company's letterhead, $91,000, made out to Derek Cole. He didn't look up right away. When he did, he smiled the way he always smiles when he thinks he's being generous instead of unfair. "This is Derek's bonus," he said, "for landing the Fresno distribution contract. I know it's a big number, but he earned it, and honestly, Ren, the company owes him this. He's been patient." I want to be precise about what happened in my chest in that moment, because I've thought about it every day since. It wasn't rage, it was recognition. The Fresno distribution contract was one I negotiated over 5 weeks, 6 calls, and one 12-hour drive to sit across from a supply chain director who didn't trust anyone under 40. Derek's involvement had been exactly 1 lunch and a signature he added because my father asked him to put a face on it. $91,000 is 14% of that contract's first-year value. It is also, not coincidentally, almost exactly the size of the annual salary gap I'd been quietly absorbing for 11 years, unpaid. I asked my father one question. "Whose name is on the distribution rights for Cole Cold Storage's majority ownership, Dad?" He said, without hesitating, the way people answer questions they've never actually had to think about. "Mine. It's my company." I said, "It hasn't been, not since I turned 30. I watched something move behind his eyes, the particular kind of confusion that happens when a man realizes he signed something 4 years ago and never bothered to remember what it said. I didn't raise my voice. I asked him to call Arthur Bellingham, put him on speaker, and ask him directly whose signature was required to authorize a bonus disbursement above $25,000 under the company's current operating agreement. Arthur, God bless him, didn't even hesitate. "Renata's," he said. "Has been for 4 years, Walter. You signed off on that yourself, back in 2015. The silence in that office lasted 11 seconds. I counted, because counting has always steadied me in rooms where other people's math finally catches up to them. My father sat down. Derek, who'd walked in halfway through the call, expecting to be handed a check, stood in the doorway, holding nothing, his mouth slightly open, looking between our father and me like we'd switched roles in a play he thought he already knew the ending to. I didn't tear up the check. I didn't scream. I picked it up, folded it once, and set it back on my father's desk. "Derek can have a bonus," I said, "when he closes a contract himself, start to finish, without my numbers underneath it. I'll write that check myself, and I'll be glad to. But this one isn't yours to give away, Dad. It hasn't been for a while." Here is what happened in the weeks after, because I think you deserve the whole picture, not just the moment everyone wants to hear about. My father and I sat down, just the 2 of us, on a Thursday evening in the same office, and had the conversation we should have had 4 years earlier. I told him what sensible cost me. I told him I wasn't interested in punishing Derek or pushing him out, only in being paid and credited for work I'd already been doing for over a decade. My father, to his credit, at 65 years old, cried once, briefly, and said something I'll hold on to for the rest of my life. "I built this thing to give my kids something better than I had. I just never noticed which kid was actually building it with me. Derek and I are still working it out. He started actually closing his own accounts, small ones, but his. I check his numbers less. He asks me less. It's not warm yet, but it's honest. And honest is a foundation you can build something real on top of, which is more than I can say for the 12 years before it. I still drive a Corolla. It's a newer one now, but I bought it myself, same as always. Some things about who I am haven't changed, and I don't need them to. What changed is simpler than people expect. I stopped waiting to be handed what I'd already earned, and I stopped being surprised when the paperwork, quietly, had been on my side the whole time.